Months? Okay. So your wife will remind you about this once in a while, about the inconsistencies. It's getting more romantic. That the inconsistencies between what we believe and what we do. And Chassidus addresses this very, very directly. So we felt, and I feel, that's why I'm here, that to talk about this openly, a lot of things are often kept under the carpet, you don't always say. And I'm not necessarily talking about the darkest and dirtiest secrets that every person carries in his nefesh habamis. There's also room for that. But even on a more able or a more subtle level, this is something you don't, when you learn Gemara or you learn Shulchan Aruch, doesn't always demand. That's why the Ramban says in the beginning of Parsha Kedeshim, there's a thing called, he asks, why Kedeshim to you? There's already so many psukim that tell you to be Kodesh. But another pasuk, so the Ramban says, remember the Ramban is 1,000 years ago. Even then, he says there's a thing called a novel, Reshus HaTeva. I'm a novel. How do you translate a novel? I mean, I could use a more able way, there's probably more grumble ways to say it. Manul is a low life, despicable, obnoxious, but it's Reshus HaTeva. And you're not going to find a Shulchan Aruch or an Halacha or a Gemara or anywhere. You can't. What does it say? To be a mensch. There's a mitzvah that says be a mensch. What does it say? Yeah, there are psukim you can derive it from, but there are a lot of things you can do that al pi halacha you're not going to find an isser, but it's still a maneuver. Loopholes, justification, because we know human behavior. We can justify anything. There are things that are clear out. Yisurim, you're not allowed to do. But a novel Reshus HaTeva is even worse than the Isser, because there at least you know who you're dealing with. I'm not suggesting anyone in this holy Kolel is a novel Reshus HaTeva, just to make it clear. I would not say this my first talk to you, insult you. Maybe later a little, but when you get more to know it. No, that's just a joke. My point is that you could see there's this dissonance. And this is maybe one of the most important things that Chassidus came to tackle. Not just give us our idea and primis atera and understand the alien self-infinite tzimtzum and Agdus Hashem and the Ilmis and Abbas Hashem, Yidus Hashem, but Toshit, how do you integrate and internalize Amunah to be primis, that it should be who you are? Now, Kamuvin, we're not expecting perfection. The whole time is based not on perfection, but at least striving for it. I remember the Rebbe once said in the Fabrengen that everybody has chesrenis. There's no such thing. Ain't tzaddik baratz ashalei yasser yasser tev. There's no such thing as a person that didn't have any chesrenis. But the Rebbe said the only thing is don't make a philosophy out of your chesrenis. That's where the problems begin. When you start making it, everyone does it, or it's some type of you try to justify it. You know you have a chesed, fine, so now you work on it. So I want to share with you a few things in this regard. It's more like an introductory, and I hope we can bond and connect. And I don't see this as a probe. I'm not like being tested here to be the rabbi, the called Mashpia of the Kolel. I said I would do my best, and let's see where we go with this. Tov Shalom et Zayin. I remember the Fabrengen very vividly. Talk about Lamed Zayin. How many years ago are we talking now?
A few.
Huh?
A few.
Anybody knows how to count?
44.
You count your fingers. Mem Zayin, Nun Zayin, Samel Zayin. 44 years ago. Yitas Kislev. And it was a very powerful Fabrengen. That's the Fabrengen when the Rebbe actually came out and said he's going to publish Ayin Beis. There was a lot of historical events happened that Fabrengen. There's a sikha then that I never forget. It's all before any of you were even born, right? And even all of the Machshava Adum Da'ak. So I remember it was right the sikha right before the Ayin Beis sikha. The Rebbe said, starting the sikha very interestingly. It's a recording. It's Chav Kislev. I think it was a Sunday. Yitas Kislev was Shabbos. I think it was Chav Kislev. And the Rebbe said, "Sidach Rosh Hashanah Chassidus Yitas Kislev, Daf Mesof Kol Sof Epistom Chassidus." Interesting expression. You all understand what that means, right? It's interesting. Is it what I'm saying? Some places like the lights go down, and they put the lights up in the restaurant. It's time to leave. They say, go down. So the Rebbe said that literally the Rebbe is saying that since it's Yitas Kislev, we have to, at the end of the day, we have to do something for Chassidus. I remember when I heard it, I said, interesting expression, like what, the Rebbe till then didn't do anything for Chassidus. The whole Fabrengen was going on, but it was, you could tell the Rebbe was going to be Magal or something. And the Rebbe did. he said that it's time to be Machadash Anu, something that the Alter Rebbe established, the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, the Rebbe Rashab renewed, and but Me'eza Siba, because of the Mulchama, the Bulbulim, remember the Rebbe Rashab was the World War I, the Rebbe Rashab was installed in Tafresh Pei 101 years ago, and that is, the Rebbe said, the Inyan from Mashpia. The Inyan from Mashpia. So, everybody knows the word Mashpia, but I can tell you, if you ask around, not many people know about that Sikhi, Vitas Kislev. And if you read or listen to that Sikha, you'll see tremendous insights that the Rebbe almost like foresaw the need for this. I know we all heard Mashpia. It didn't really take off, even though the Rebbe spoke about Riches then. And I'm going to share a few words that I want to really drive a certain point home. The Rebbe not only Vitas Kislev, on Yud Shvat, and Vitas Kislev, then he continued. Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Yud Shvat, Tu B'Shvat. So this is like a Rebbe launched like a mitzvah. Mashpim, then he spoke about Mashpias, and Barichas Gdela, not like 5 minutes. He spoke hours about it. Spoke even what the meaning of a Mashpia is. It didn't really take off yet. They had the prerequisite meeting in 770, a committee, and then there were people who appointed themselves as Mashpia over everybody. Nobody was makabel them, There were always certain candidates that always nominated themselves. And it didn't work out. Not only that, the Rebbe even printed then Kuntres Abbas Yisrael came out that summer, Lamed Zayin, and the Rebbe printed a special Kuntres for Mashpiyim. I don't know if you ever heard this parsha. Didn't really catch. But if you listen to the Sikha, and I'll point out a few points I want to make, it's like you see, it wasn't like a Psak Zeda, some Hatakona. It was really a very sensible and logical, and like you saw the Chassidus, as the Rebbe says, Sofkol Sof, Tanakh was for Chassidus. The truth is, I always thought that the Dvarim Tavshin Mem Vav, which would be 9 years later, the Rebbe started Aseh L'Charav, which is more popular today, more familiar. It was almost the same aces. He just didn't use Aseh L'Charav, he used Mashpia. Maybe the Rebbe repackaged it, maybe he thought this way, Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, people, I don't know. Maybe there's a difference between Arav and Mashpia. I'm not going to get into all the diukim here. But the Rebbe said the following, with the Sikh and the Mashpia Sikh, Yutas Kislev starting. He said that the whole Yesod of Tanya, if you look at the Agdam of Tanya, what does the Alter Rebbe say? That Tanya was not a sefer written like a regular sefer, a chibur. It was a sefer of Likutei Eitzes. Maybe you could tell him to daven. Rabbi Spielman.
Yes.
If you mind, a little more b'chashoyi. B'lachash.
I'm disturbing, I'm sorry.
Sorry. No, it's like Eined Movada. You're like oblivious that there's a room here, but I'm just, not
I
disturbing.
apologize, I'm sorry.
So the Rebbe said, the whole Tanya, you look at the Hagdamah to Tanya, what does the Alter Rebbe say? It starts with the whole Esnatzos. That the truth is, it's much easier and better to speak to people in person, because they can talk to you about their issues. But, on the other hand, when you write it in a sefer, because the whole first half of the Hagdamah is all about the chesaron of writing in a sefer. You read it, it's almost like a rabbit, because then you write a whole sefer. The Alter Rebbe writes all the chesaronis of a book, that it's a sefer is not for everybody, and so on. But then he says that the Yedei Makirei Kamina, since we're talking about people that recognize me and we've spoken to each other personally, so now I can put it in a sefer since there's no time to meet everybody. So I put all the eitzes and Avedus Hashem on paper, in a book, so everybody can access it. And then he adds, he says clearly, Kol Inyonei B'Avedus Hashem. And then the Alter Rebbe adds, and if a person cannot find an answer in this sefer, he says, I suggest they should go to the Gedolei Ha'ir and speak to them and hear what they have to say. And the Gedolei Ha'ir should not be Menei Bar, they should offer themselves, and the Meirei Mishneim Havaya, and everyone will be blessed. That's the Hagdamah, the Kitzur. You've all read it, everybody's learned it. It's a very interesting Hagdamah. So the whole Sefer Tanya really is a collection of personal yechidus, basically. And he's saying clearly, I'm not writing a Sefer in the abstract which will fit to some, it's relating to your lives. Now, everybody who learned Hagdamah over the years said, okay, Yedei Makirei, with the people that Alter Rebbe knew that. It says, "B'Medina Selu v'Smuchis Lo." meaning back in Russia, and this. But what about everybody afterwards? After the Stalkus of the Alter Rebbe, we're learning Tanya now. Last generation, the Alter Rebbe never met us. We don't know the Alter Rebbe; he doesn't know us. So how do we apply Tanya the same way? If Tanya, the whole basis is because he knows us. So Chassidim always preached two things. Number one, every Rebbe is like the Alter Rebbe, so every generation has its Rebbe. So they're just a continuation of the Alter Rebbe. And secondly, that the Alter Rebbe, in his profound wisdom, was able to anticipate every challenge that we would have in Avodas Hashem. So B'meila Tanya is nitzchi, not just for the challenges then, but also even today. Like someone asked me the other day a question. He said, "So you're telling me if I'm struggling, and I don't want to say with online addiction, there's an answer in Tanya? The Alter Rebbe didn't even have it online. How could he have talked about it?" He said, "Yeah, but he's a Rebbe. And it's an inim shebenefesh. We're not talking about what the addiction is. We're talking about the advice how to deal with the challenges you have inside you, not the symptoms, the cause." So when you think of it that way, and I go back to Yutes Kislev, so what did the Rebbe say? That basically the concept of Mashpia, the Alter Rebbe established. He didn't call them Mashpiyim. He called them G'deilim Shabiyir. Which I'll give you my Yesh Leim B'derech Hefsher, why he would write such a term in a moment. But that basically the Alter Rebbe established it. That since you won't, and of course many people can't find a direct answer in Tanya. Tell me the last time you listened to Tanya and found an Eitzah in your challenges? Or do you have a Mashpia that can give you an Eitzah? No, most people see Tanya as very Helik Tanya Kadisha, but I don't know how many people can say, I look in Tanya, I find the Eitzah to how to deal with my own taivas, or I deal with kas, or deal with kina, even though the Alter Rebbe talks about it. The reason is very straightforward, what I said before, because even Chassidus was taught to us with dissonance, even Tanya. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I started Chassidus Applied 7 years ago, I kid you not, I heard from Mashpim in Yeshiva, I'm not saying any names. A Mashpia that told me, "You think you're going to make Tanya relevant?" That's what they told me. So I said, what's Tanya supposed to be not relevant? He said, that helped by them. So I said, so why do we learn Tanya? He says, it gives us a sinas keyach. He says, so all the eitzes the Alter Rebbe said, he says, we're not the daughter of the Alter Rebbe. So I told him, with all due respect, you shouldn't be a Mashpia, you should sell shoes. What do you mean Mashpia? You don't even believe in your product. You know, the product, Tanya Sheterish is not relevant. Anyway, I'm not here to criticize anyone, but it's a reflective of a lot of what we picked up, which was these things are lofty ideas. A Beinani, someone's going to be a Beinani. Okay, we have the Alter Rebbe's Taich, what that means, but who's even aspiring to that? Complete control of your Machshava Dibur and Maisa? You know? It's almost dismissed. It's almost like a joke. I remember when someone in Bachman, when we were in Maristan, said to the Mashpia by Fabrenin that he's working on his Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, that not to be ever initial in any way. So the Mashpia started laughing at him. Ein Rednish, he dismissed him like an Ein Rednish, Now, the Bachman was naive maybe and he was innocent, but you don't laugh at someone that says in Tanya, it's fine, you find a way. So going back to the Sikh and Yutes Kislev, the Rebbe said this was a Yisod of the whole Chassidus. Alter Rebbe made it. You can't just learn Tanya, you need someone to talk to. I always wondered, why did he write G'deilim Shabiyir? What's the G'deilim Shabiyir? It's an interesting title. Say Rabbonim, Mashpim, Rosh Yeshiva. You don't see G'deilim Shabiyir very often. So here my own Yesh Leim B'derech Hefsher, feel free to reject it, but it's a mitzvah. Alter Rebbe, of course, is a daikin in every word, and G'deilim has a gedder in halach. What's a gedder of a gadol? Not the gadol who thinks he's a gadol be Yisrael, A gedder of a gadol, a pitayr, is someone who's mature. You become a gadol at bar mitzvah, that starts making the gadlus. Not right away at bar mitzvah, you could say someone's a gadol, but it's the beginning. And then at age 20, or whatever the age is a mature person. And I'll use in my own language, I would say someone who's emotionally intelligent. Someone who's emotionally sophisticated and mature. Not a gone who can be brilliant in his mind, but an immature little kid. A gadol b'meichin, b'midas, b'das. Because if you want to apply Tanya to life, you need a gadol. You don't need someone who's a brilliant masculine. You need someone who's avid. You need someone who's izgarbit, someone who has an understanding, what we call today, emotional intelligence. That doesn't just understand ideas, but knows how to relate to people. I'm sure you've met people who have a lot brilliant up there. They don't have common sense. They don't know how to speak to somebody. They come there. Sometimes we all know there's a fifth Shulchan Aruch. There's common sense. I remember once in the Sikha that Rebbe brought from the Rambam. What are the Tanoim to be Sanhedrin? So the Rambam writes. I don't remember the exact language, but the order is first a Chacham and then a Yudea Teda. So the Rebbe said what the order should be for kept. First you know Teda, then you become then a Chacham. The Rebbe said because if you don't have Chacham Sachayim, if you don't understand how to apply Teda, the Rebbe gave examples. Sometimes you have to not always say everything. This Chacham is much more than just ideas. You all know the story with Belvin Green. So he was inspired by Rabbi Moshe Feller in Minnesota. So he was a professor, and he was a big mind, and he would debate with Moshe Feller all the time about God and about evolution and this. Moshe Feller was a very tmimus kid, not a scientist. There's a famous story that Rebbe even told by Fabrengen. He didn't say names. In the middle of one of their debates, it was time for Mincha. Shkia was coming, so Moshe Feller suddenly got up and said, "You have to daven." And Volov Green was all upset because what do you mean? It was such an important conversation, and what do you just get up there? He said, "This thing's more important than our conversation." So he was insulted at the time. But the bottom line I want to share is that he kept on arguing with him about evolution. So Moshe Feller gave him the Rebbe's letter, famous letter of the Rebbe, and he read the letter, and he came back with all respect. This is for juveniles. This is for children. This letter is not for a scientist. So Moshe Feller told him, go write to the Rebbe. You can write to the Rebbe. He says, I can write it. Yeah, write, put your whole, slug it up, write whatever you want to write. He wrote a long letter to the Rebbe. You ever hear the story? It's a very powerful story. He wrote a long letter to the Rebbe, and basically rebutting the whole Rebbe's argument. He didn't get an answer. A year or two passed, I think. I heard the story from him directly. Then, slowly he became more closer, and he became Hashem and Torah Mitzvahs. Ended up moving later to Israel. And I think 2 years later, he went to Yechidus. Came to Crown Heights, maybe Chav Gimel or Chav Dalet. And, he saw everybody wearing hats like this. So he went to really buy a hat. There was my Yasha had a bazaar on Kingston Avenue. Famous my Yasha's Bazaar. Ever heard of it? She sold like not second hand, fourth hand. So you can imagine he bought a hat that looked like a shmata completely. He goes into Yechidus. The Rebbe burst out laughing. And the Rebbe took out a yarmulke from his drawer, and he says to him, please take off that silly thing from your head. That's what the Rebbe told him. He gave him a yarmulke. That's the beginning of the Yechidus. At the end of the Yechidus, the Rebbe says to him, by the way, the letter you wrote to me a few years ago, I want to respond now. And he said the Rebbe went to a whole elaborate discussion, beautiful, explaining, said that letter Taka was written for lay people, wasn't for scientists, but since you're asking scientific questions, and he was so impressed. Later, he actually got a letter from the Rebbe following up with the kitzur and a summary what the Rebbe wrote. It's not printed, but if anybody wants it, I'm happy to send it to you. In English, one page, like a sofa. So he says to the Rebbe gave me such a brilliant answer. I'm very impressed. Why didn't you answer me 2 years ago? Or whatever the time was. You had an answer. I thought the Rebbe didn't have an answer, so you ignored me. So, and for 2 years, I felt like you didn't answer. So the Rebbe said to him, because I sensed from your letter that I may have won an argument, but I would have lost a chassid. Yeah? I may have won an argument, I would have lost a chassid. This is Chachma. This isn't just ideas on paper. Someone that knows will probably right away. You have an argument, I'll give you a counter argument. The Rebbe sensed in his letter, though maybe arrogant, didn't have enough bittul. He would just go, people like to debate. They don't like to lose their arguments. They continue debating. The Rebbe sensed this. It's such a lesson. Like when do you exercise restraint and when not? I'm not saying you always have to do that. But it shows you, this is what Chassidus, besides, as I said, all the Gevaldik and Gelim, came to teach how you take Chachmas HaTeira and make it a Chachmas HaChaim. At the end of the day, Teira is Teira's Chaim. What is the most common expression from the Rebbe? Of all expressions, anybody can guess, the most common repeated word that Rebbe used, more than any other word in all the Sikhs.
Teira's Chaim and Chaim.
Yeah, Teira Meloshen Heirah. Some people say Amaiso Ike, which is also very popular. But Teira Meloshen Hira. It's a adak. It's not even it's a mokin in the Shem. Thank you. My sounding, was that Mashpia or? Thank you. I appreciate it, thank you. What is that? And I remember many times the same vibration that Rebbe could say it 10 times. Well, we heard it already once, we should say it again. Yeah, because it's a message that most people don't know. You can learn Chumash, Rashi, Ramban, Eben Ezra, Alle Zachen, and not have one lesson in your life. Just go to most shiurim is that way. And by the Rebbe, that was impossible. Teira came to give a Hira. Before you get to the Hira, you have to analyze and learn it from Alle Zaken. But always the Hira B'chaim. It sounds like simple, but if you think about it, it's quite revolutionary. It means Teira is not Leiba Shamayim. If the Teira does not address your and my personal issues, there's something fundamentally missing. That means the Eibishter is here, the grace Eibishter, but he can't talk about my challenges, my fears, my insecurities, and other stuff like that. So the Alter Rebbe established right away Tanya, Chelik Rishon, is Kutei Eitzes for all advice. And there's the Gedalim, the reason it says Gadol, as I said, my take on it is because it stims. The Alter Rebbe wouldn't send you to someone who's an abstract philosopher to explain Tanya. That's not what Tanya came to do. Tanya came to be Eitzes B'Avedis Hashem. Who do you go for that? Someone who is doing a tribute. Someone who understands life. Someone who's a Gadol, Gemidus, and a Mechin. Someone who understands, mature, knows when to give advice, knows sometimes to be, all the wisdom that's necessary in communicating is not always what you know. It's how you say it. I always tell people, it's never about what you say, it's how you say it. You can say the most controversial thing the right way, people will love it. You say something else the wrong way, you'll offend everybody. And that's not manipulative, it's understanding how you apply it. So going back to Yutas Kislev Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe established a Mashpia. Then he explained Yud Shvat, actually interesting types in Mashpia. You all learn the Chassidus, the difference between Eir and Shefa, right? And everywhere you learn, you always talk about the mile of Eir and the Chesaron of Shefa. Eir is Dovek B'moyer, Me'ein HaMoyer, Eir is Bittel, Shefa is disconnected. That's what Shefa is. Shefa is like water from a pitcher. That's Shefa. Eir is like Eir HaShemesh. Eir Ein Sof, Bittel. Here the Rebbe turned it around and said Mashpia is from the word Shefa, not from the word Eir. I mean, if you look at the Sefer, the Rebbe goes through all the chilukim between Eir and Shefa and explains the mile of a Mashpia. For example, a Mashpia that's detached, like Eir. We know Chassidus says Eir is Dovek B'moyer, but Eir shines everywhere equally. A garbage pile in a palace, the same Eir. A Shefa is not that way. Shefa is tailored to each individual. A Mashpia that is made Eir from a pedestal, from the ivory tower, is not a Mashpia. A Mashpia means and he's beslapshus to each Talmud or each Mushpa and each Makabel. Then we went through a whole thing with Shefa is exactly opposite of Eir. So Eir has a Maila, is Dovek B'moyer, it's good to have, the Rebbe is a maskir, a secretary is supposed to be like Eir. A Chayzer is supposed to be like Eir. But a Mashpia is supposed to be Korav Makabel. That alone is already a lesson in life. And I remember in Yeshiva, and again, this is a little off the record. I don't remember once, and I say this with sadness, one Mashpia or one Rav or Rosh Yeshiva should ever talk to us about Poshet being a mensch. People were bullying each other, people were angry. Everyone had their, human beings, kids. No one, and not once I remember a conversation that Taylor expects you to be a little more refined. It was always very dogmatic in the sense, do this, don't do that, you have to wear a jacket, etc., etc. It was all very, technical. The only time I remember, that's how rare it was, Rabbi Ushbal. You may have heard Rabbi Ushbal. He was our Rosh Yeshiva in Bedford and Dean, later in Ocean Parkway. And I remember once he gave a talk about how a bocher has to be clean. That's all he talked about, cleanliness. He says, I remember he said, the negel is ein rein. And it made such an impression on me. He wasn't talking Tifa Chassidus, he wasn't Tifa Nigla. So I went over to him afterwards, and I said to him, why do we have to be rein? He says, was haste. Mamlechas kein b'gei kodesh. A hilike folk. That was ein rein. Tara megel de gdusha. it left such an impression on me, not because what he said was so profound, because no one ever said anything close to that. It was the only time I could describe some type of mashpia almost, talking, something I can relate to. And, we all knew, we learned the Lamed Tes Melochis and the Kiddushin and, all the Mesechtes. But there was a lot of detachment. Now, I hope things have changed, even though you read the Davis, but I think maybe in this context, maybe things have changed. Maybe there's better, higher expectations. You'll have to tell me. You're like, I'm a very different generation than you. But sometimes, der Helev v'der kol and ein kol chadash tachas Hashem is also. I'm not sure about that. But not to talk about it, for sure not. So, taking this cue from the Alter Rebbe's Akdama Tanya, the Rebbe's Sichi Yutes Kislev, and so many other Sichis and Maimorim that talk about this, and the Rebbe said, Sof kol sof ton epis v'achsidus. That meant the Rebbe felt that there's a fundamental missing piece. People are learning Teire, Nigla, Chassidus, but there's missing that human element that a Mashpia adds. So that's why it was felt that maybe we should come together and talk a little on this level. I know I gave a long Hakdama here, and I didn't get into a Shalom Bayis advice or other advice, but hopefully we'll get there as well. But I thought it's important to establish this, because this alone is not even stated enough. And I can tell you, to you maybe it's not controversial. There are Mashpiim out there that have told me they don't believe in this approach. They don't talk to us so practical. You have to teach Bochum, Idyoni Hafshata, and Mizach the Avil, as I said before, and each name you can disable. So I said, wait a second. The end of Perikid Beis in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe has a whole section, Bein Adam L'Chavere, Kina, Sina, Tina. Talks about jealousy, hatred, human things. Later in Ageres Tekedish, there's a whole section on kas, anger, obviously on atzvus, depression, issues of typhus. I mean, what are you talking about? The Perek Aleph, the Daled Midas, Daled Yiseides Haroim, talks about the Gaiva, talks about Bar Mitzvah. To say that the Alter Rebbe was talking only about Anyoni, that Atzilus, he talks about Bein Adam L'Chavei, not just Bein Adam L'Mokim. The problem is it's never been translated into language that we can associate with. So Chaz was showing to say that it's only for them. The Rebbe said many times, Im Reiku, Mikemu. If you don't have an answer, it's Mikemu. It's not because it's missing in Torah or it's missing in Chassidus. It means you didn't find an answer. And be humble. Instead of saying Chassidus is not relevant, say that I don't know what's relevance. I have to go to Abdelim Shabir to find out. So that's one important thing I wanted to open with. And then I want to say one more thing about this. I was teaching in one of the Beis Rivka high school, 12th graders. I was teaching Tanya Kabbalah. I ended up teaching a half a page in an entire year. But the guy talked about the whole Chassidus, I felt was more effective. So we stuck around a few lines in Tanya, but it was mostly because I was also then a Chassidic and a Maniach, I had access to the Rebbe. So I decided, I'm going to teach Tanya a certain way. And why not? If I can get a stempel from the Rebbe, like an endorsement would be nice, right? So I wrote to the Rebbe, etc., a note, and I said, since I'm teaching Tanya, it's in English, I want to know if you could teach, the Alter Rebbe says the whole Tanya is based on the Pasuk, Yusuf, on the Pasuk, right? Kikorav elecha dover me'ei, befichal v'vavcha la'asese, levayet heitev eichshu korav me'ei, derech aruch v'ktzara, v'ezes Hashem yizbarach. So it's all based on this pasuk in Parshat Mitzvah. How do you translate the word korev? That's like the key word here, korev. So everyone translates close. It's close to you, korev elecha. In the beginning of the pasuk it says, you may think it's recheka, ve'evelayam, b'shamayim. So no, it's korev elecha, le b'shamayim, le b'derech recheka, le me'evelayam, ki korev elecha. So I asked the Rebbe, the word close, what does it mean close? You could be close to, means I'm close to Arim Kodesh. That means that Torah is close to me. Can you translate Kodesh as relevant? Relevant. And one thing, I always teach it that way, but I never heard officially you can teach. So I wrote to the Rebbe, can you teach relevant? And the second question I asked, since the Alter Rebbe is telling us that the whole Tanya is based on this pasuk, that means every word and every line in Tanya is coming to explain the relevance of Torah mitzvahs and Elokus and Yiddishkeit to us. Can you say that? So the Rebbe wrote on both of them, he made a check, 2 checks, on question Aleph, question B, Beis, I wrote in Hebrew. After I heard that, and the Rebbe made a check, I remember even Rabbi Groner saying to me, wow, this is like a Yiseides thing. I haven't talked about it really, but I always use relevant. Now relevant and close is a whole different reality. Relevant means that why did the Alter Rebbe have to write a Tanya? Because Moshe Rabbeinu only said that it's Kodev Elech. He didn't say Eich. The Alter Rebbe needed to write a whole Tanya, which is Teresh B'Ksav of Chassidus, which means all of Chassidus is coming to explain the relevance of Elokus, of Teireh, of Mitzvahs, of Tshuva, to each part one. Which means the Machshava Dibur Maisa, not just in one of them. So to me it was like a Gavaldik, because you can now teach Tanya with that type of approach. So for me this became something, this goes back now, I don't know, over 30 years ago when they ever wrote that, maybe more, 35 years ago. And I find that to be such a powerful directive, because then you can ask yourself the question, every Vort of Chassidus you learn, even about the most Hafshata Dikinyan. I ask you learn about Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Atzinzu. So Eir HaKol B'Moed. Can you tell me how that's Kodev Elecha B'Ficha B'Vavcha L'Aseh? Most of us will have no clue. I have no clue. It's a nice idea. It explains Ardus Hashem. It explains, maybe it answers questions of how Elokus doesn't have Ein Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi, and all the beauty of Chassidus gets. What's the Kodev Elecha? But when you know that every Vort is Kodev, then it's a whole different thing. Then you're compelled to ask that question. And Shad is Chacham Chetzit Shub. So, what do I conclude from all of this that I want to share? Is that Chassidus, every Vort came to teach us Kodev Elecha. In Nigla, you learn the technical, what the Eibishter wants of us, the mechanics, but you don't learn the Kodev Elecha necessarily. The Kodev Elecha makes it personal, takes the Amunah and puts it in the previous, and addresses the real issues of our lives. So what we like to do, I like to do with obviously your blessing and permission and cooperation, we want to do this now maybe once a week. Again, if this is the goal here, this is a two-way street here. And try to do exactly that. Take an issue that you guys are dealing with, maybe something that is perfectly in place, but good is best and is better. And there's always challenges as well. Everybody has challenges. If you're newlyweds, maybe now you're in the honeymoon stage, everything is beautiful. But life has its ups and downs. And I'm not suggesting that we have to always look for the negatives, but maybe we can do a little of that. Try to maybe do something that was not done in the yeshiva properly. And if it was done, as I said, it could only be better. And try to take a few real-time issues that you're dealing with. I'm not talking now, you're your age, you're young, Kolel, young alike, just got married. I mean, some of you do have children, no? Is there anyone with children? Nobody?
Not everyone.
Oh, okay, fine. So everybody here is married within the past year, just to get a sense.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. So you're like a senior member of the meeting. So you're all married within the last year, basically? Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I'm not going to talk to you like, we'll talk about things. And I mean, I would be honored if you also asked questions and challenged me and maybe brought something to the table. I know it's not always easy to do. In Chabad, we don't like group therapy. But I don't see this as group therapy. But if there's something you want me to address and you don't want to say it in public, no problem, you can write me even anonymously. I don't need to know your name. I'm just trying to open it up. If you want to bring it up in our conversations here, perfectly fine. It's up to you. I think, time you feel more confident, but I'm not here to expose anything. I'm not here to assault your psyches, as they say. But we all have things, and I think that this would be Mekayim in the most beautiful way, what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, and what the Alter Rebbe's wanted from us with Mashpia. And I don't just mean with myself here, I'm talking about for you, because at the end of the day, you're being trained here. This is part of a training ground, to be Rabbonim, to be Poskim, to be maybe the Hira. But I can tell you that you need equally, maybe even more, the Chochmas HaChaim. So the training is also to include how to apply it. One day, you have maybe a couple come to you as a Rov, or as a Mashpia, or as a Shliach, or whatever your role will be, or Rosh Yeshiva. And sometimes you'll see that the halacha will tell you the facts, but the question is how to say and what to say. Now, I'm going to give one example. I don't know what we have the time right now. Did we make is there a time frame here? When are your wives expecting you? Let's put it this way, for dinner. Huh?
Imagine people at different times.
Okay. Right, exactly. We'll go, maybe I'll go to 6:30, makes sense?
Yeah.
Everybody fine with that, ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to tax your patience either. dinner, what you're looking forward to. So I'll give you one example. One example with a shalom bayis issue, which is a pretty good, actually a very extreme example. It happened with me. There was he's already all about shalom, the shliach in Santa Monica. His name was Rabbi Levitansky. You heard of him, right? What was his name? Avram Levitansky. A very Yerushalayim, dedicated, Bittul Dikich Chassid. He was also a Rav. So we were dealing with a couple that we both knew. The couple were getting married there, and he was going to be Masada Kedusha. And he had his Tanoim. His Tanai was that you have to go to the mikveh. He was very strict with his things. He was very kind, but he had it very firm. He didn't cut corners. It was a real thing. And I used to talk to him a lot because he had also a Ross from Zalman Shimon, the Rav who heard things from the Rebbe. This is the one I want to share with you. So he told me, like I said, there was a couple. They came to see him. They also knew me. They were married already a few years. They were both frum. They had become Shem B'Torah Mitzvahs. And then his wife, the guy tells Rabbi Levitansky, my wife doesn't want to go to the mikveh, whatever the reason is. So there's halachas about this. You probably know the halachas. So Rabbi Levitansky tells him, I don't hear your question. So he says, what do you mean? And he repeats it, and he yells louder. He thought maybe he's deaf. So he says, my wife doesn't want to go to the mikveh. What should I do? We're committed to it, she committed. I want to know you're a Rav. I don't hear your question, Rabbi Levitansky said. So the guy repeats it. Rabbi Levitansky said, listen to me. I hear your question with my ears. This is not a question you should be asking me. It's a question you should work out with your wife at home. You shouldn't be asking me as a Rav this question. Now, interesting, I told you, he's not a guy that was who's afraid of confrontation or afraid to tell somebody something they can't hear. That you're supposed to divorce your wife, going to the letter of the law or whatever it may be. So the guy called me. He says, what's the matter with this rabbi? He won't answer my question. He's telling me he doesn't hear this question. I should go talk to my wife. My problem is with my wife. So I heard that, I knew that Levitansky didn't just say that, Stamazeh. So I called him up. I said, I'll get back to you. I told this guy. I called Rabbi Levitansky. Yeah. I said, I understand what you're saying, but why? Why Taka don't you tell him? I was just curious. He said, I heard from Rabbi Zalman Shimon Dvarkin years ago that Zachen ben Ish be'isha, even if there's halachas about it, nicht all darf man sich mischen. Let them work it out, because it's not just mikveh. Who knows? They maybe have other issues. Maybe she's angry at him. Maybe he did something. Who knows? He's only telling you what he wants to tell you. You want to bring them both to Din Teda? You're going to lead it to a get? That where we're going? Maybe let them work it out. They're adults, let them work it out. So I said, Zalman Shimon told that to you? He said, yeah, Zalman Shimon told me, the Rebbe told it to him. And nicht alles darf man empfen. Now, interesting, right? Many people would say this sounds very it's almost like a makel. But it's not a makel. Why? Because when you know Teda, you know that Kolel Teda nit nilasa sholem be'elam, the Rambam Paskins in the end of Hilchas Chanukah, that the Eibishter says, Yimcha Shmi, in order to preserve sholem bayis, the din, where the halacha is, if you only have money for Chanukah licht or Shabbos licht, which one do you like? So you think Chanukah licht, because Tadir, Chanukah is only once a year, and many different reasons you can explain. No, it says because Chanukah is Persum and Nisa, which is beautiful, but Shabbos, Neir Shabbos is Shalom Bayis, and Shalom Bayis trumps everything. No pun intended. I didn't mean to use that word. I don't know if you're Trump lovers or haters, so that was not. Basically, Shalom Bayis overrides everything. And then at the Ad Kedei Kach, that in Hilchas Seita, the Eibishter says, you have to put a shame of fetish on the tongue of the Seita, but you can't find another way to prove that she's innocent. Because the Eibishter wanted to show. Then I went and I looked up and I found a letter from the Rebbe. I don't think it's printed in English cases because it's a sensitive letter. And the Rebbe is advising a couple, and the Rebbe says almost the same thing. They write to the Rebbe that one of them is more frum, the other one's less frum. And the Rebbe writes, look in Hilchas Chanukah, Sof Hilchas Chanukah, Yimcha Shmi. In other words, not to say Chad V'Sholom you're allowed to do an Isur, but you have to be sensitive dealing with Shalom Bayis, and it's like you're going to take a detail. Shalom Bayis, and especially if there's children, I don't know if this case there were children, but it doesn't matter. You have to balance it out. You can't just. Now, either halacha says a mikveh about a woman. There's context to that halacha. It's not just a black and white halacha. You have to know why and what circumstances. If you look at the whole picture and a Rav looks at it, it's one thing. Here's a perfect example. I'm not saying it's relevant per se to anybody here, but it just shows you how Shalom Bayis, when you look at it that way, you start saying, Ein Chanami, you know what? So if it comes down to Shalom Bayis, or you're going to go to shul, and for whatever reason your wife or your children want you at home, and you need to go to shul, is shul more important than Shalom Bayis? I remember I once met a guy in 770. The guy was dealing with Shalom Bayis issues. And he used to come to talk to me. It's Ma'ariv time, it's like 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. And a Dreitzach in 770. So I said, what are you doing here? It's like bedtime for children. So he said to me, his Mashpia told him that when the children are being put to sleep, he should go out of the house and go to 770 and go to a shir. So he shouldn't get in his wife's way. Verstehst? This is advice from a Mashpia because he's a pain to her. So get out of the way. Don't be there when the children are being put to sleep. Instead, he's hanging around like a single bacher in 770 and then with a bunch of losers, you get the idea. So I said to him, what? Who told you such a thing? The time when your children are being put to bed, you're here? Go home right away. What kind of narishkeit is this? I know this is not applicable, but I just want to give examples that just come to mind. Where you don't have seichel, you don't have a certain hedgish of Torah. It's like completely, I mentioned maneuver versus a Torah. You're completely off. You're going by the letter of the law. You're missing the whole boat, the whole spirit of it. Now, I'm sure, I don't know you guys, but I'm sure you have common sense to some extent. Would you all agree with that? Maybe not, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, women and men are very different. The Abishter blessed women with more certain regesh, it's called intuition, and men may be more cerebral, more brainy, and they're not dafka, they're smarter, but they think they're smarter. So I think it's vital to know how to balance all these issues. So again, my goal is not to talk only about problems. Problems should also be addressed. My goal is really how to have a deeper understanding of what it means to be Aid, a chassid, what it means to what marriage means, what a wife, and so on. There are many things that, even in Chassidic, it says clearly it's drain the house all day. Why not? Two people love each other. Why can't they just be home? If you were able, let's say someone supported you, is there anything wrong with being home all day? There's reasons for it. It's not based on because it's not good to be near your wife. It means because you have to have balance in life. So there's a lot of issues that can be addressed. Obviously, because of time, I'm not going to go into them right now. I wanted to really give more of an overview. But I wanted to leave the last few minutes if anybody wants to say anything or comment. As I said, I'm playing it more by ear. Because my goal is I didn't come with a script. I'm not reading from anything. I'm trying to talk to you, voting my Yitzim and Aleph. And anything I could be of help. This is what my shlich is b'chaim to some extent. So my goal is really to engage with you in some way that could be helpful. If it's not helpful, I won't be insulted or embarrassed. I'm here to help. So if anybody wants to comment or say something, that would be nice. If not, it's also fine. You may be shy guys, and we hope to, like I said, we do this. The goal right now is maybe every Tuesday this time, unless you feel there's a better way to do it. It's optional, obviously, after the Seder. First they wanted to do it in the house, and I suggested let's keep it here more because in the house there's people who want to talk more, a little more privacy. But if anybody has thoughts or anything, this is in a way a interactive discussion. So if anybody wants to say anything, please. If not, I'll just say some concluding remarks.
Just say quickly, I appreciate it, and definitely would like it to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Also me?
Me too.
No, listen, we'll see from the attendance. If you don't like it, again, I'm here for you, and I'm also open if anybody wants to speak to me privately, wants to call me and want to talk about something. Again, I don't need to know your name. I'm happy to give you my cell number if you want that, because I understand there's some things I'm not going to be able to talk about here. But if there's anything like that, please know you have someone that will try. I cannot promise I have answers for everything, but I definitely can promise I will try. And to me, everything comes from the Torah, Chassidus, and the Rebbe, Rabbeim. I don't believe in, yes, I've read plenty of psychology, but I read it really just to see, but I find that Chassidic psychology is better than anything out there. What we don't have is trained Chassidic therapists. That's what we don't have. And maybe that'll be part of what happens here. You'll all be, I don't mean necessarily therapists, you'll see. I'm telling you, I deal with shluchim all the time. Many shluchim tell me they don't know how to address issues in their community. People come to them with shalom bayis issues or with children. They know Torah, they know Chassidus, but they don't know how to apply it. So my goal here is that you become true Mashpiim, Gedalim Shebiyir. That's the objective. You'll become the Gedalim Shebiyir, and you'll see it can have tremendous impact in your life. Alter Rebbe says, Meir ein Yishneim Havayit. That's why we're here. You know, the Neshama Kumt Arab, 70, 80 Yor, Tzatana Teva Yidin. I'll just close with that as a story. You may have heard the story. The story is about there was a shliach who sent a guy who needed advice from the Rebbe, and but there was no yechidus anymore. It was like in the mems. So the shliach told him, the Rebbe goes out for mincha, and upstairs in 770, stand by Gan Eden HaTachten, like by the door to Gan Eden HaTachten. The Rebbe walks by, and just lean over and you'll ask the Rebbe what you want. But the Bochum got a wind of it, so they surrounded him and they made sure he didn't get to the Rebbe. Okay. Shliach tells him, okay, plan B. Go to the Rebbe's house and stand, you heard the story? No?
Sounds...
It's very interesting. You stand by outside on President Street, when the Rebbe comes down the steps like 10 o'clock in the morning, days of Kriya or later or something, as he's walking to the car, there's no one there, Bochum won't be there, you'll be able to... I mean, it was a chutzpah, probably a chutzpah, he shouldn't have done it, but he did it. And he spoke to the Rebbe about 9 minutes, I think. I recall the story correctly. The Rebbe spoke. The Bochum, there were Bochum, but they weren't standing right nearby, they were a little farther. So when the Rebbe got into the car, the Bochum yelled at him, chutzpah, without an appointment, taking the Rebbe's time. You know how Bochum could be. Anyway, he was so embarrassed that he decided to write a letter to the Rebbe. And he apologized. He said, I didn't realize, and the Bochum reminded me that I shouldn't have taken your time, and I apologize for taking the Rebbe's time, the valuable time. Anyway, the Rebbe responds, not to him. The Rebbe writes a note to the Anhola, that they should find which Bochum were there on President Street, and tell the Bochum, Aleph Beis, the Rebbe wrote 2 things. One, what are they doing 10 o'clock on President Street when it's middle of the Kimidumani, there's Man Hatfilah. So what are they doing on President Street? Beis, Halo Yedur Lahem, Pizgim Abal Shem Tov, that Neshama Kumt Arab Lamata, 70, 80 Yor, Tzatana Teva Eden, Ve'ulai Lazeh Yarden Nishmosi, Lazer Liyehudi Zeh. Lama Hum Avalbul, something like say the Staustus or something like that. You hear this? The Rebbe is saying to them that maybe this is why I sent out to do a favor for a Jew. You're being involved, mixing yourself into this. I mean, the Rebbe saying that is pretty strong. I heard the story from reliable sources. So that is ultimately our shlichus. It's not just to take care of ourselves. The Alter Rebbe says it in the Lashon Achid. Meir ein Yishneim Havayit. Look at the end of the Hagdom. It's very powerful. It's really the yesod of shlichus, of the yesod of being mashpia, being helping others, that ultimately gives you the biggest brachas. So the real goal is really that, is that you should be empowered as much as possible with Torah, Chassidus, and Hadracha, that you can really give people aces. Obviously, if you yourself process it that way, it will help you reach and access other people. So with that, we should be zecher finally to, even before we go through all of this, tell the world that Bolo Odes Deus Hashem Kamayim Neyom Chasim. Yefutza Ma'anesecha Chutza is not just Chutza, the darkest part of the world, it's also Chutza Shebenafshi. Every person bringing Chassidus into their nefesh, even the so-called darker corners or the outer corners of the nefesh. And it's good to meet you all. If anybody wants my number, I can give it to you. And maybe that alone you don't even want to say you want to realize. But I'll give it to you.